Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you here today, Tuesday afternoon. I'm in Sydney. My guest, Jake Kane, also known formerly as Jacob Kane, um, and he's a real estate guy, but he's also the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. And um, obviously, on the weekend in Sydney and Melbourne, both the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age ran and published stories that were quite comprehensive, and they put a fair bit of work into it. Like there was like some real heavy grunt work there in terms of research. And I have to say, Jake, I opened up some of the press and I was reading it, and you had an opinion and the REIV has an opinion. You're obviously aware of what had happened. And I listen, I've got two daughters. I actually put a post there this morning. You know, the issue with underquoting is that you've got to understand when it's deliberate with the intent, people should know the pain and suffering it causes. I've got two daughters myself, right? And they're now going to be entering the world of property, whether they're renting or they're buying. And I see so many people, Jake, on auctions, and I hear so many stories that miss out. It's like, imagine, they fall in love with something, they get emotionally attached to it, they look at it online or they look at the brochure every morning in the kitchen, and then what actually happens is they go to the auction, and within 5 seconds, they're out of the bidding after the first bid. And apart from being devastated emotionally, they've also probably have spent money on a pest inspection, building inspection, the time going back to properties, I don't know, probably lawyers doing stuff, doing their due diligence. And to me, it's like basically in Australia where we've got a housing issue, it would be like basically being in the ocean, drowning, and all of a sudden you got some hope. I see a lifeboat. I'm actually going to get my property. You get on the lifeboat and then they throw you off and it goes and you sit there. I mean, I know it's a terrible metaphor. I'm trying to think of what it feels like. But Jake, that's what it does cause when it's intentional, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Tom, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I had the opportunity to respond to the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald's coverage with an op-ed. And the kind of thrust of my opinion in response to that is the real issue here continues to be housing affordability, right? The auction system, regardless of whether it's underquoted or quoted correctly, delivers the best possible result for the seller of the property, and that's as it should be, right? That's the design of the system, and that's I know you're one of the best auctioneers in the country, and that's what you train your people to do is to hone their craft and do that for their clients. But if we have a problem in this country with properties selling above quoted price ranges or above reserve prices, what that really boils down to is that there's competition for those properties. There's competition, and the prices of those properties are increasing year on year, month on month, year on year. And I think that's really the underlying issue here. I think when we talk about underquoting, that contributes definitely. That, as you've described, that can be a heart-wrenching, a humiliating process too. Like to come in thinking, oh yeah, I've got a chance. I come in, and as you say, that instance where immediately you're blown out of the water, right? But that context is the symptom of undersupply of housing, right? And that's the issue that we need to focus on here is how do we make sure that our kids and our children's kids have the chance to purchase a property?
Okay, well said. So we're actually on the same page with that because it's an emotive issue, isn't it? The housing issue. I mean, for God's sake, the federal election was essentially one on one policy, housing. We know it's a big issue, right? So let's move on. And by the way, and you know, Jake, I mean, I think in New South Wales, it's the Office of Fair Trading. In Victoria, it's the
Consumer Affairs.
Consumer Affairs. Listen, I don't have much to do with the Consumer Affairs, but when I come to the block and they're there, I find them extremely useful. Like I think they make a genuine effort to police but educate at the same time. And I say to real estate agents, because a lot of agents say, but Tom, you don't get it. It's a bipolar market. And you can go into a property, and one property that you thought was going to hit the mark, you come out of it, you do your campaign, and it just doesn't get the buyer engagement. And there are other properties that are similar that surprisingly do really, really well. And I totally get the concept. There's no recommended retail price in real estate, like an iPhone or like, Commonwealth Bank shares. That's a commodity. I understand the concept. But the important thing that we should share here, Jake, is I think if the government in Victoria, Consumer Affairs, if they were to come in, what they're looking at is systemic behaviour. I think that they would, if they saw a property, well, why did this one sell? And you can justify it. But if they see, wow, why is this one, this one, this one, this one, they see that that is a systemic behaviour. So I think, don't you think agents don't have to stress out too much if one goes off, if you can justify it?
That's right. You're absolutely bang on. That they're looking for systemic. I'll caveat that by saying there's a growing level of cynicism here in Victoria about we have an underquoting task force, and the reports are coming in, and you can see it in practice, right? Where someone might make a really low level administrative error. Could be a keystroke error when loading the property onto realestate.com or domain, etc., right? Which can result in the same fine that, to your earlier point, that someone for systemic, deliberate abuse of the rules will get, right? And we've got instances where people have repeatedly done that, been shown to repeatedly do that. They've been fined on, multiples of that, $11,000 or $47,000 agency agent fine. But effectively, they're still operating in the system. They're still operating in the same way. And to them, those fines are almost a cost of doing business. And what we want to see, and something, again, the Institute's keenly advocating for, is that the Consumer Affairs, yes, they're pragmatic in some respects, right? But infrequently is the example in the real world. We want to see those people that make mistakes inadvertently are treated more leniently, and those that, as you have identified, systemically abuse the system, that they suffer the harshest possible penalties. Because we want to stamp the practice out, because, as we've identified, it sucks for the buyers. It sucks for us too, right? For those agents that are doing the right thing, which is the overwhelming majority, for them to have to compete with in that landscape, it's anti-competitive. It's unfair. So, yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And quite, look, and I mean, obviously, my life is dealing with real estate agents, and I get a lot of real estate agents that saying, yeah, but, Tom, when you go there the first day, and by the way, I've done the research, like private treaty sales that are monitored by CoreLogic, RP Data, or any of the data companies show that, Joel, and it doesn't surprise me, about 80% of properties that are in the private treaty mode, based on the data I've seen, sell for lower than the list price. So we clearly know that originally the vendor is going out there with the hope that they're going to get an emotional buyer, a heart buyer. And we all know that owners think their houses at the start are probably better than, and I get that. And just like my wife thinks that we've got the best two-looking kids in the world. That's life, right? I understand that.
She's right, though, mate.
She's right, 100%, right? Now, what I was going to say is, but the Act allows for you to get the buyer intel or any market changes, any comparable sales, an announcement on the RBA or anything, that you can take that into account and adjust down, but also adjust up. And I think it is important to adjust up, because going to an auction, having 50 people that want to buy a property, says to me that maybe there should have been an adjustment. People just think to themselves, and I don't listen as an auctioneer, Jake. I don't like the concept of going to an auction if there's 20 people registered, because I think to myself, what's going to happen? There'll be one or two that really go for it, but there's going to be 18 who probably are going in there thinking that they have a chance, but they have no chance. So I think, yeah, it's the importance of adjusting up or down based on the market and buyer intel, correct?
100%. You make it such an incredibly important observation, I think, which isn't discussed enough, like particularly in media coverage of this, right? Pricing properties is incredibly complex, right? It relies on market feedback. These are subjective assets, for want of a better word, right? Which, again, the owners might think, wait, I've got this incredible blue wall, that's got to add 50 grand onto the price. And the buyer public thinks it's disgusting, right? And these are subjective things in a dynamic market. Like, we've got an announcement this afternoon. What kind of impact can that have come Saturday, right? For those properties that are listed right now with a price range, if the RBA does 0.5% today, right, what could that mean come Saturday? In 3 days, we could have it turn around where people are paying 50, 100, 200 grand more for something than they would have done without that announcement. So absolutely, we need to have that capacity, that freedom to adjust up and down. And we should be doing that throughout the process to educate the buyer, to your point, right? Because you don't, as an auctioneer, it might feel nice to have, or a sales agent, to have 20 registered bidders on Saturday, but you prefer to have the people there that can afford the property, and to be able to deal with those other people in good faith on other properties that you've got for sale because they can't afford that particular property.
Beautifully said. So I want to ask you, Jake, before I move on, because I'm interested to hear about some of the proposals that REIV is backing and supporting. But I'm going to make the assumption that some of the people that are watching this here might actually just need to get absolute clarity to what underquoting is. Could you, let's just quickly say, underquoting to me is that you have gone in, you've estimated the selling price of a property to be this, you've discussed this with the vendor, and then what you've done is you've used another price that is lower to actually entice people, when realistically the opportunity to buy that property at that price does not exist. And
I think that captures it. Yeah, it doesn't need much more than that. That's it. It's an intentional use of a price that the property isn't valued at, that you don't think it's valued at, the owner doesn't think it's valued at, to, as you say, entice or lure in buyers to what you think will create competition. I personally have a view around this. I think we've bought into it, particularly on the East Coast, Sydney, Melbourne in particular, what we call a logical fallacy, right? A post hoc assumption that after we do this, then we get this, which is more people, higher price, right? But I think I'd ask all the auctioneers right out there, when does the real bidding start? When do the fireworks happen in an auction? And that's, in my experience, having watched thousands of auctions over the years, is when the auctioneer declares the property on the market, right? Which is effectively, we've achieved the reserve price, right? And I think that reserve price, disclosed or undisclosed, that the same, to your example before, 20 bidders, registered bidders at an auction, 3 of them are going to buy it. They're going to have a chance, right? The other 17 aren't in with a chance. Those 3 buyers, those 3 bidders are going to be there regardless, right? And they're going to bid as soon as they know the property's on the market, and they're going to bid competitively, and they're going to push the price up. So I think we've bought into this narrative that we need more people equals higher prices, but there's no empirical evidence that proves that out, right? We haven't tested it. And that's something I'm really keenly interested to see if we can do. Is like,
I've got to tell you, Jake, if you think about it, that's pretty profound, because what you more or less said, will you get a better result with 2 good buyers than 30 average buyers? And is your marketing attracting the average, or is it attracting the right people, right? And what you're saying is, are we using a band-aid situation, which is if we lower the price, there'll be more people, but we don't know whether the more people are the right people that have got the capacity and the capability to actually buy that property. And that's, you know, that's a valid thing. Now, I want to ask you, let's get solution focused, right? Because what we want is something that can actually work with all stakeholders. Consumers are happy, buyers are happy, agents that work that are of a role, they're a stakeholder in there, you know, the government making sure, and most importantly, the integrity of the real estate market in Australia, because you need to have integrity. People need to be able to know this is what's happening. Like, imagine if it was in fund management. Oh, you can actually buy that share for 30%. Oh, no, you can't. You know what I mean? It's good to have some stability and integrity in the marketplace as people talk about what's going on, right? And I've got to tell you, Jake, you know, I had a property 2 weeks ago that I had to auction. And at the last minute, the agent said to me, Tom, actually, if you're heading this way, maybe don't come. And I go, why? He goes, we're going to postpone it for 2 weeks. I said, why is that? And he said, because another agent has just listed one down the road. It's a very similar property. It's 10 houses down, and they'd gone out there quoting 20% lower, right? So what's happened is all these buyers that we're expecting now are sort of holding back. So, I mean, this is impacting, you know, people's lives. And don't get me wrong, we're not talking about cancer, but, you know, the trajectory of their life can get impacted significantly. It's the biggest asset that they own. So, you know, situations like that. I also want to, you know, sometimes I hear, Jake, I've heard from agents that tell me that sometimes vendors want to get into the act. Vendors are saying to agents, listen, why don't we quote it low and watch it go? I mean, you've got vendors that are saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been in that situation where we've come in to, you know, give an appraisal, given it based on the current market conditions, the best assessment of where the value sits, and they're like, you know, a 1.5 to a 1.665, and had them go, why don't we start it at 1.3? And you're like, yes, at the legal? And they're like, yeah, but, you know, our understanding, all our friends say that this is how we get people to bid it up. We'll sell it for 1.7 in the end. And it hurts us. It hurts, you know, the people that are doing the right thing. It has an impact on the market. When what we do there in that situation, right? Like that example you gave, it confuses the entire system, right? And when we've got confusion and opacity in the market, we damage our own chances of success as agents. We damage our clients' chances of success in the vendors, and we piss off the buyers, because everyone goes out there and they're like putting arbitrary figures on. They're like, oh, that agency, they tend to quote 25% under. So I need to put on that on top of the price. But that agency, I think they're a bit different. They're 10%. And people are trying to navigate this like muddy landscape where there's no clarity about, you know, what the real price, you know, the expectations are and where they're likely to spend. And again, we can't be anti-competitive. Like, we still need to pursue the best possible result, but we need to inject some clarity into the marketplace so people can operate in good faith, in good knowledge, and we can work with the people that have the capacity that.
That's another observation I've ever thought about as well. You've actually brought up to the surface something else that I've realized, that because of what's going on, we get this inaccuracy assessment of the market, because I get some people that are experienced in buying real estate that automatically say, I'm adding 15% of that because I've done this many, many times and I know this is how it works in this area with this agent. But then you get the first home buyer who's new to it all, right? And they sit there and they say, we love this one, having no idea that that agent might have a history of having done that, and they go off, they take time off work, they pay for their pest, they pay for their building, they're sitting there for an hour with their lawyer going through things, they probably don't sleep all night, anxious about the auction. They get there, and before the auctioneer has says, ladies and gentlemen, they're already been priced out of the market with the first bid. So let's talk about, Jake, you said a few things in your press release. You've been in the media a fair bit the last 48 hours, and why wouldn't you be with what actually happened? One of the things that you're suggesting, and I'm interested, well, maybe should I hand over to you and tell me what are some of the proposed initiatives that you think would be useful for
Yeah,
what we're talking about?
absolutely. Look, I preface this by saying what we want and the impetus of us coming out and staking a position in the debate is to be able to have uh, some work done with the government collaboratively, sector-led, right? Sector-led, because to your question earlier on, I think you said, what are the solutions? And we say this all the time in the policy landscape, right? But there is no silver bullet. There is no silver bullet to this. Um, so what we actually want to engage with the government more and have a sector-led solution to this. One of the things that we said that we would support hypothetically, if the government were to introduce it, is a disclosure of reserve prices, right? Not at the front end of the campaign, but at the tail end of the campaign, right? That it's absolutely vital that the owner and the agent have the opportunity to.
So Jake, it can't be at the front of the campaign, because if you use private treaty as an example, if we know that nearly every property does not sell for full price, it stands to reason that that would be an inaccurate methodology to work out that, because you're not taking into account market intel, buyer activity, offers, and all of that. So you're saying towards the end of the campaign, have a reserve that's made available?
That's right. Yeah. We effectively kind of have to do that now anyway. You need to engage with your vendor and know what the reserve is. But the contention is that if we put that up, so let's call it 48 hours prior to the auction, within that sort of unconditional type period, right? You give the prospective buyers, any registered buyers, that information. They go, okay, give me the shot. I'm going to roll up on Saturday because I've got $1 million. That's my budget. The reserve's $1 million. I'm in with a chance, not a good chance. In all likelihood, it's going to go significantly above that. But I know that if I come, I'm not going to be one of those bidders who's immediately deflated because they never had an opportunity. So does this solve the problem that we were talking about before? No, that people will still be disappointed. People will still not be able to afford the home of their dreams. They will suffer the embarrassment and the frustration, the emotional roller coaster of being involved in the process. But it gives them that opportunity at least to know that they had a chance, and if they didn't, they don't come. They don't come. Right.
And I think it gives them an opportunity of 48 hours to actually rethink their own position on this property, to potentially go off and say, well, maybe we should pay more. Let's have a look at what's around, or maybe that's not for us. But it doesn't happen in that split second where you're at the auction, where you just see that much, the sigh, the fact, what do they say? It's the unexpected that lands heaviest in life. The fact that they can expect that that's the level it's going to be. Keep going.
So in combination with that, now you guys do this a lot more with a lot more prevalence up in New South Wales, but we don't have building and pest inspections offered to buyers with any regularity. So we've suggested that we could make those mandatory, right? So in terms of mitigating that cost, that emotional impact, etc., right? We go, the vendor provides one of these. It's available to anyone that's a registered buyer or bidder on the property. That means that buyers can go around without necessarily dropping thousands and thousands of dollars in repeated missing out at auction campaigns, get the information they need to bid in an informed fashion. And that way, again, you've got the most informed, most well-equipped buyers there on the Saturday, ready to put their hand up and bid with confidence for the property.
Okay. So, and I can say that in Sydney, in New South Wales, but the majority of those auctions are in Sydney. There are companies like Before You Buy, but there are agents do that. Agents actually get building inspections, and they've cut deals with building inspections. Example, I know where they say, can you provide like a Peston building at this rate to a buyer? But if they're successful, they've got to pay the whole amount. It seems to actually help because the cost of missing out is not as much, if you know what I mean, right? And I can see that would probably be a good thing. By the way, if anyone's got any questions in the chat box, we're going to come to those at the end because I know that people have got certain views. So far, those two initiatives, having a reserve may be made public 48 hours prior based on buyer intel market forces during the campaign, Peston buildings to be provided up front. Someone said to me, I read Jake's piece about his view about having the reserves, but he goes, I don't think that would work because wouldn't a buyer then think to themselves, oh, I'm paying too much if they're bidding, over the reserve? I said, not really, because that actually happens right now. People know that they're bidding when the property's on the market, right? Yeah.
I asked this. I was having a debate with one of our past presidents this morning. He's a great guy, and funnily enough, I'll give the example. He was president of the institute down here. We used to have a thing called dummy bidding. I assume you guys added up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, we would just take it. My dad used to have my mum at auctions. Used to take bids off birds and trees and whatnot. Right. So this gent was president of the institute at a time when those laws were being reviewed, and the institute had to take a position on whether or not they would support the banning of dummy bidding, and they were pretty split at the time, similar to where we are nowadays with this kind of debate, right? It's hard, as you said earlier on, to get consensus on these things, right? And he had to make a casting vote about whether or not the institute would support banning it, which he did. But the arguments against it were that it would destroy the auction system, that people wouldn't bid. They would, you wouldn't be able to get to reserve prices. You wouldn't be able to sell properties over the reserve price. You wouldn't be able to get them done at auction. The auction system would be destroyed. 20 years later, we've still got the most vibrant auction system anywhere in the world. We sell 30 to 40,000 properties per annum at auction. 75% clearance rate, goes up to 80 when the market's better. And the system today is better and more trustworthy than it was back then, right? So I would say to those auctioneers out there that say, oh, people won't bid, I'm like, do people stop bidding when you hit the reserve now?
No, actually, I think it's actually the opposite, to be honest with you. Like, it's like, man, it's the game's on. There's 5 minutes. Do it. Let's do it. It's up for grabs, So they're the two main things that you feel. I also notice, is there any others that you've
Look, the other sort of core, point in the piece was this that consumer affairs need to be a little less cynical and more take more action against the egregious offenders in this space. What we need, look, I know you guys have had an instance of that up in Sydney over the weekend with someone. I don't know that case was explicitly underquoting, but some pretty shabby behaviours if the reports are to be believed. We want to see those perpetrators down here that are ruining it for everyone, continually abusing the system. We want to see them have to suffer consequences of their deliberate and fraudulent behaviour. So more lenient on the people that make the stuff up, so they don't, have an accurate enough file note of a conversation with an owner where they've agreed to adjust the price, give them a slap on the wrist rather than a massive fine, and really come after the people that are bringing down the reputation of the sector and causing the most harm.
Okay. Now, I've got to say, Jake, I've had a couple of real estate people send me some of the solutions that they think that should be considered, right? And I'm just talking aloud. These are some of the things that have come up. One agent said to me, there should be a portal that is set up, that is made available, and even another agent that sees a property in the area which they know is grossly being underquoted, that they can just actually go in there, type the address in, and it brings it to the surface during their campaign. I've had other people say that maybe it's actually in line with what you've said, maybe that there's a more clearer, explicit penalty. If you do it once, you lose 25% of your fee. If you do it twice, on that one, you lose half of your fee. If you do it 3 times, you lose all of your fee. Because what you're saying to me is what has happened in Victoria. There's been a few small fines, and it's been, no problems. I'm still writing 2-3 million in GCI. That's cost of business. I can live with that.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think that the danger with the first proposal, and this is the reality, the reporting from SMH and the reporting from the Age down here, right? And I had a first version of my op-ed between everyone here, right, which I put through to the editor, and he's like, no, you can't criticize our methodology, right, to the extent that I did. I still got some criticism in there, but effectively what they've done is gone, here's 26,000 results. 52% of them have sold above the quoted price range. Underquoting, right? And it's guilt by association. They've tied explicit examples of underquoting to macro data, right? That in and of itself, that data is nowhere near evidence that underquoting is systemic in the system, right? Within the process. But people don't actually understand what underquoting is. I heard someone give an example on the radio yesterday. I was waiting to go online, go and do an interview with one of the shows down here. And the person gave an example, and he just gave an example of competition pushing the price up. And he was like, if I had known it would have gone for 750, I would never have been there. But there was no underquoting. And he was like, that's underquoting. And the radio host was, yes, that's underquoting. Like, no, it's not. That's the auction system. That's the point, is to drive prices higher. So the issue with that first point you made, I think, is people will jump on there and report when they don't know what underquoting is, and it'll muddy the waters around that. So I think, and this is the problem also, I think, with consumer affairs down here in Vic, the biggest segment of the population that are making complaints, that are lodging reports to consumer affairs, are agents.
Right.
And that's because we know what it is. We see it and we despise it. We want it stamped out, but the general public don't understand it with the nuance and sophistication that we do. We can spot it a mile away when we see it, right? But the GP doesn't necessarily know that. So, but that second concept, absolutely. Like, all we want is a cost for doing it that is so great that people go, I'm not going to do it. It's not worth it.
What about Jake, what about this idea that if it's an auction property, a registered valuation is made at the start and it's available and people see it's a registered valuation? I had one agent say, what about that as an idea?
Yeah, look, I think, we get into the realm of real estate agents against valuers, right, in terms of views on their capacity to accurately value a property in time and place, right? I think, not to criticize any valuers out there online today, but I think we're better at navigating the complexity of a dynamic market, right? I think, valuers tends to be very scientific in their approach, and we combine art with science in terms of working out how to price a property. So I think that might confuse, and when people talk about, well, it's anti-competitive, right? Or if you have a reserve price, that will stymie competition. I would argue that the same would be true here. If you've got a valuer, say, a registered value saying it's worth $1.2 million, then how do we get to 1.3 or 1.4 if it's anchored at that level? Just the first one.
Now, if it's, I know that we've gone a touch over. Have you got a few minutes that I read out some of these questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been monitoring the comments. They're not really questions. They're just comments.
Okay. Let me just quickly go through. So I went to an auction in St. George area. Agent quoted 1.3 throughout the entire campaign. 70 people in attendance. Bidding stalls at 1,629,000. Agent then goes to the vendor and gets the highest bid to increase to 1,640,000. Still not enough. Back inside and gets the bidder to increase to 1,650, and only then sells it for 350,000 above the selling guide. Well, yes, Glenn, that happened. Look, the truth of the matter is that could be underquoting. There could be the vendor has said, like that number there, and that's one of the things that, you know, you are right. I thought the study that, you know, Domain did was comprehensive. Like there was a lot of work that was in there. There were things, but there weren't access to. Like example, you can't actually see what the reserve price was, whether adjustments were there. I think they were looking at the listing guide when it was listed and what it was selling for. So yeah, so then Wayne goes on to say there has to be a willingness from the industry to want to participate in what measures are suggested. As we all know, Consumer Affairs introduced SOI, Statement of Information, which had little effect. Agent beware. Remember what happened in Queensland. Well, I don't know. What's your view on the Queensland? They don't quote any prices. You know, they just say like we're not quoting. And I'm increasingly seeing buyers using AI coming outside of an open for inspection and saying, what are the three closest comparables to that? That's happening in Queensland. Any views on that?
Yeah, look, a lot of people I've spoken to recently, including some of the, you know, the CEOs of some of the big groups, they're like, how do we get to the Queensland model? No price. I think the genie's out of the bottle in that respect here in Victoria because we've got this pricing thing. I think I don't see a world in which we could go back to that. And, you know, there's some validity to the point that, you know, data has been democratized. You know, the buyers and vendors have access to effectively the same information that we have. They've never been more informed than they are today. So you know, there's an element of like, both buyers and sellers take some responsibility for this. You know, you're seeing the same stuff. Our job, as we like to say, is to sell the property. It's not to value it. But I know a lot of agents up in Queensland who are like, the system's great here, it works. I also know a heap of people who buy in Queensland and they're like, this sucks. So we're never going to have the perfect fit on these rules.
So Jake, I'm the kind of person that thinks it sucks because when I walk through David Jones or Myers or, you know, a shop and I see something, I want to look at the item's price item, right? To think to myself, what's this? Is this something that I can afford? Or is this, I don't know, a $7,000 hoodie by Balenciaga that, like, it's not for me, right? So I get that, but I also understand that now that we're living in a world where information is so transparent with Chat GPT. I mean, people are doing this right now. They're saying, who are the three agents I should call to come and look at my house? Then they'll actually say, I called these three agents. Who should I give it to? They're also saying, basically what I'm saying is the information's more available. So I might be changing my mind about that. Sam Babler says, I can see from false reserves being set if they get disclosed and vendors exercising their right to withdraw the home before it's knocked down as per the REIV. Oh, right. So Sam's saying, what if they put in a high reserve and yeah.
Or they set it low and then they're not happy. Yeah, look, that's the case now, right? You can go out, you walk in, you've just bought the property at, you know, 1.5 million or something like that. Walk in and the owner goes, no, actually, I want more than that, so I'm not going to sell it. You know, we tend to, I think, in the debate around these things is look for the exception rather than the rule. You know, like, and don't get me wrong, you've got to consider all angles, but no legislation works 100% of the time. Like it's like, how do we find the ones that work overwhelmingly in the majority of cases? And I've seen it in practice. Though, you know, there are a number of agents down here that have used reserve prices, disclosed reserve prices for a long time. They sell successfully. They sell consistently. They sell consistently above the reserve price, as is the design at the auction. And that, you know, there's the owners aren't out there going, oh shit, you know, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put it up, or I'm not. You know, they're at peace with the decisions that they've made because it's been informed by market feedback and their own position. You know, owners have to take some responsibility in this too. I think that's your point. You know, anything that you buy out there right now has a price on it. Has, you know, the person selling it has to take some responsibility and say, this is the least money I will take for this property, right? You know, and that I reserve the right to adjust that up if the indication from the market is that it's worth more than that. I want more than that, but putting a price on something isn't really controversial, when you consider, and they do it all over the world, and I point to this fact, like it's only here, really, particularly on the eastern seaboard, where we are regarded with such contempt and mistrust, right? Other real estate agents around the world are held in much higher regard than we are here in Victoria and New South Wales in particular. We're ranked lower than the CFMEU, right? That's how little people trust us, right? And this pricing regime that we have is absolutely central to that lack of faith, of trust, of respect. And we've got to do something about that. We've got to uplift the sector, the profession, right? And we'll probably never scale the heights of doctors and firefighters, right? But we should be above politicians, surely.
Well, let's get on par with teachers. Nah, that's teachers and nurses above us, firemen above us. Bottom line is we don't want to be on the bottom of the competition, right? We don't want to win the wooden spoon like the West Tigers, my team do every year. Let me just quickly run through. Richard says, mandatory disclosure of reserve prices can put the vendor at a disadvantage, especially if the bidding stops just sort of the reserve price and is passed in. The buyer will therefore only pay the reserve price once it's disclosed, but a good agent with an undisclosed reserve can negotiate a better price. Get it? Scott, that's your answer. Don't play with the legislation. There is also so much regulation placed now. There is properly investigate and penalise those agents who are doing the wrong thing. Yep, remove their licences if they are habitual, not just suspensions. I'm an auctioneer and I realise Tom is one of the best. Well, not everyone would agree, but anyway, but these solutions are over complicating what can be already done. Can you, Scott? Yes, I like Scott's a beauty. He's on here all the time. Scott, just remind me again, you're New South Wales or Queensland? Just type in the chat box. Put the onus on the vendor by the way of a fine and a 90%. 99 will not be part of. Put the onus on the vendor by way of a fine. 99% will not be part of it. Richard goes on to say, also when a vendor sets a disclosure reserve below the market price, then this can lead to a legalized underquoting as buyers. Look, I can see all this and I'm running out of time and I've got to be somewhere in a moment. Agents need to be better at educating on the estimated selling price and how it is set and reasonable based on 3 comparable sales and reviewed, and the difference with how the ISP is determined. They are not the same. Scott then goes, if in Queensland you give comparable sold properties during the campaign. Queensland, Scott says, I'm in Queensland and as an auctioneer plus selling agent, I wish I could give a price guide to have better, more transparent conversations. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Listen, Jake, thank you so much. Jake, you're the custodian of our industry in Victoria. You represent us and the interests, and I can tell that you care about this matter. You are on the front foot first thing Monday morning, and one thing is for sure, and quite, it's interesting, but Jake, I did a bit of research. In Victoria, it appears that 22% of properties are auction properties. In New South Wales, it's 20%. All over Australia, surprisingly, it's actually less than 15%, right? It's actually not significant. I mean, we seem to be caught up in the world of real estate with quotes, guides, and all of that. Yet in reality, 85% of properties are sold because a vendor says, this is the number I want. They put it on the market. The buyers come and look at it. Over a 4-week period, most of those properties will reduce the price and they will sell the property, right? That's what actually happens. 15% of the times in this country, it's through an auction. And this is what we're talking about. What do you reckon happens next now? Like yeah.
Yeah. Look, we've contacted. The good thing about being on the front foot about this kind of thing is I had a text message from the Premier's Chief of Staff yesterday morning saying, "What are you doing Friday? Let's catch up." And I said, "What am I being dragged into the principal's office for speaking out of school?" And he's like, "Nah, let's talk." The leader of the opposition down here publicly said, I want to work with REIV and the real estate agents to build the best possible system for, that's equitable and fair. From here, it's about having those conversations. It's about if we can get a sector-led review of the landscape right now and see if we can come up with solutions that will support it. So we're not firmly wedded anywhere. Some of the solutions that have been raised that, could work, right? Like we've got to keep our mind open to what will give us the healthiest system for auctions in our jurisdiction across the country. But to your point, we love auctions. It's part of our identity as salespeople, but the overwhelming majority of properties are being sold in a different way, right? And we suck up all of the oxygen in debate around this stuff, but what do we need to do in that space to make sure too that system is fair and equitable for sellers, for buyers, and for agents as well? So there's heaps of work still to do.
So think about it. We're talking about 15% of the transactions. 85% of Australia are doing other things. Why aren't we worried about them as well? Anyway, thank you so much. Love your work. Everyone, sorry to keep you, and thank you for everyone that contributed. We'll speak soon. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thanks, Tom. Cheers.